beautiful home in Blue Point. This home has to be at least $250,000.
I hope so. Three-quarter.
Or $750,000, whatever. And I don't know what we're going to talk about.
Why don't you start with what Montauk was about, how it tied into Philadelphia experiment.
A brief synopsis, maybe, of the...
Okay, first of all, I got to find the
However, you want to start with Philadelphia and then go to however you want.
how it ties in.
I first have to find the power cord. I got a place to plug this power cord in and start up the tape recorder.
Go.
There, plugged in. Alright, way back when. Let's start with the Phoenix Project. Phoenix Project is a carry-on from the Philadelphia experiment. That was a...
Can you hear them? Can you hear them okay?
That was a silly little project that the Navy did back in the 30s and the 40s, attempting to make a battleship invisible. They wanted to make an aircraft carrier invisible. They threw the switch one eventful day, and the ship went into hyperspace, caused all sorts of problems for the people on the boat. Navy said the thing's a huge failure, it's a huge success, but it's also a huge failure, and they shelved it. In about 47, it was decided, the government can't leave this thing alone. They got a wild effect that they wanted to study. So in 47, they reopened it and started up with what we came later to know as the Phoenix Project. It was originally the Rainbow Project. It was moved to Brookhaven National Laboratories, and Dr. von Neumann and all his associates, this was long before any of us were involved in it, started to replicate this thing. Out of the Phoenix 1, the early project, came the stealth technology, which I cannot talk about. Either of these two guys could talk about the stealth technology, but I cannot talk about it because of my job. And also came out all sorts of energetic little toys, such as radio songs. What is a radio song? Well, if you remember all back when we were kids, we saw these little white plastic boxes that had a white bottle hanging down on it that they connected to a little red parachute, filled up a balloon with helium, connected the whole thing, and up in the atmosphere it went. The government told us, hey, this thing is a weather data package. It has a temperature sensor, has a humidity sensor, and it has a pressure sensor in it. And this thing will ultimately transmit temperature data, humidity data, temperature data, reference data. And the switching was controlled by the barometric pressure at the height by what they call the baro switch. This thing used a very unusual type of pulse modulation. In most cases, they used a CW, continuous wave oscillator, and pulsed the thing off. The pulse was pulsing it off. This turned out to be a very efficient conversion of electrical energy to etheric energy. Now, I very recently started collecting radio songs. I don't know why, but I did. I walked in with a radio song, and one of the associates at Space-Time Laboratory says, things are a weather control device. So of course that piqued my interest. I'd already known that the humidity sensor was terrible. Its accuracy was a lot to be desired. I'd known the temperature sensor was terrible. Its accuracy had a lot to be desired. And the other unusual thing that I've wondered about is, I can get all the radio sounds I want. I've never ever seen a receiver for them. So, we first did a quote-unquote psychic reading. See, at Space-Time Laboratories, everybody uses CAD, computer-aided designs. At Space-Time Laboratories, we use psychic-aided design. So we had a number of different psychics read on the radio songs. Weather control device, doorbuster, orgone enhancer. That's the readings that came through. So I got very interested, and I started to ask around about radio songs. The next thing I found out by word of mouth is these things were designed at Brookhaven National Laboratories up in Long Island, New York, just up the road from this place. And I started to talk to people I know at Brookhaven. Ran across a retired gentleman from Brookhaven who wishes to remain nameless, so I won't name him. He'll stay anonymous. He told me that the design was originally done by a character by the name of Wilhelm Reich. Of course, that piqued my interest even more. Wilhelm Reich. The story goes that in about 47, Mr. Reich handed the U.S. government a weather control device, a little package that would do door busting. He felt that if he could reduce the amount of door and increase the orgone in the storm wouldn't be violent, it wouldn't have winds, and it wouldn't do the damage. It would be a less violent storm.
What is the DOR?
Deadly orgone. Dead orgone. That's the bad stuff.
And where does that come from?
No one really knows where it comes from. I've heard a number of theories. Well, essentially, orgone can be considered like life energy, energy from life forces, energy from living beings. Dead orgone is same type of energy but dead. It doesn't have any life in it. It has a tendency to decrease life functions. It reduces life functions. So the government took this little widget that Mr. Reich handed them. He told them, put it on a balloon, send it up. Of course, they put a parachute on it. They didn't want the thing coming down with a big, loud, crashing bang through somebody's skylight, and the government gets sued for all sorts of money. And they send the thing up into a bad storm, and it gets reduced in intensity tremendously. So the government goes back to Reich and says, hey, we like the thing. So they launched another part of the Phoenix project where they designed these radio sounds. This is almost like a little subsection of this, by the way, this story. Now, of course, I dug further and further into it. As I already noted, I talked of the receiver. There are instances where we know they launched these things from OSC, every airport, every weather station, they launched them from planes. At one point in the 50s, there must have been maybe 200 to 500 of these things launched every day. The radio range, being a radio person, I can tell you about that, I checked it. The radio range on these transmitters, even up in the air, maybe is 100 miles. So that means when they launched one of these frequencies, there had to be a receiver close by. They're going to send up a data transmitter and now have, they have to have a receiver. That means if they're sending 200 or more of these things up each day, that would be one pile of a receiver. These receivers should be very common. Now, I happen to be a receiver collector. I have over 100 receivers in my personal collection of receivers. I have never seen a radio sound receiver. I've heard of them, but I've never seen one. I got almost every other receiver that was used in the 40s and the 50s by the military.
I have a question. What is the center frequency without modulation on the radio side?
403 megahertz and 1680 megahertz. They use two different frequencies.
They're both on simultaneously?
Huh?
They're both on simultaneously?
No, it's one or the other.
One for primary and one for secondary.
No, it's one transmitter or the other transmitter that's in the package. The early ones are on 403. The later ones,
exactly?
plus or minus 2 megahertz. And the later ones are on 1680 plus or minus about 6 megahertz.
They were crystal tuned or?
No, they're just free running oscillators. The 400 megahertz, I was going to get into the details, technical details, how the radio sound works. Alright, this is a good time to go into that.
and their
I don't
favorite
have any
show,
illustrative
Stranger
materials. So I'll have
Things.
to attempt to
The man,
describe to you people
Max,
how the
Billy,
circuitry
and
works.
Lucas discover
It's
the
a very
mysterious book
unique
in Samantha's
system that
basement,
they have.
full of enigmatic clues.
Essentially, the
Armed with
temperature element
Walkmans,
was a
neon-colored
thermistor type.
bikes, and an
It
insatiable
is
thirst
a
for adventure,
negatively
they
varying
decipher
resistance
cryptic
with the
messages
temperature. As
that
the
led
resistance
them
goes up,
closer to a
because the
hidden
temperature
realm
goes up,
beyond
the
the ice
resistance goes
wall.
down.
Along the way,
Now,
they
I had
encounter
a mass
eccentric
spectrograph
figures
done on
and
one of these
discover
thermostats,
coded
and I compared it
messages
to a
strewn
YSI
throughout Pal
thermostat.
Hills.
And
Reaching the
they
outskirts of
both
town,
have carbon
they
in
were
it. You know,
faced
they
with a
both are
towering
essentially
ice
carbon,
wall
but
and an
the
enigmatic gatekeeper.
radiosonde
Through
thermostat
clever
had some silver in
persuasion,
it,
they
had some gold
convinced
in
the
it, had
gatekeeper
some
to grant
platinum
them
in it,
entry,
had some
promising to bring
iridium.
back the most
I can't
radical
remember the other two
synthwave
elements it had.
tunes. Beyond the
It
ice
has a
wall,
fair amount
they
of silver
discovered a
in it.
breathtaking landscape
Silver
of
was about
shimmering ice
10%
and
by
neon
white.
lights. With every step deeper
Now,
into the
for a
realm,
thermistor,
they
it's not going to make it
encountered
any more accurate. If
gigantic
anything, it's
puzzles,
going to make the
battled
curve
ice
go really
creatures,
straight.
and confronted
You
their
taking it with
own
metals
fears.
like that. Of
At
course, you
their
read Wilhelm
journey's
Reich
best,
literature,
they
you'll find
discovered
that
an
Reich
ancient
used
temple
sensors that had
housing
gold
the
and
gold
silver in them.
synth, a powerful
That's one
artifact
interesting note
capable of
there.
unlocking untold
The
musical
humidity
magic.
element
Guarded by the
is
mysterious Ice
a
Queen, the gang
plastic
faced
plate
one final challenge: to prove
with
they could
silvered edges
and unlock the
with a
cold
grid
synth's true
of
potential.
conductive lines
With
going
favor
across the
and
plastic
friendship
plate.
prevailing,
You know, this
they
way and this
tamed the
way.
cold
You know,
synth
this way,
and
this way, this
unleashed
way,
its
this way, this sort
mesmerizing
of thing.
sounds upon the world.
They put on
The
it
Ice Queen's
a
heart
very
paused,
odd mix
revealing
of
her longing
chemicals.
for
The
companionship
chemistry
and a
lab
deep
has not
love
come
for
back yet what the
baby's
mix of
music.
chemicals is they put on it.
Returning to Val
Now, the
Hills,
unusual
the
thing about
gang
the
shared
temperature
their
and the
incredible
humidity
tale
element
with
is
the
most
town,
electrolytic
sparking a
resistors I've ever
musical
seen,
revolution.
the
The
resistance
once
goes down
sleepy
as they
Val
get
Hills
damp.
transformed
These
into a
things, the
vibrant
resistance
hub
goes up
of
as they get damp.
creativity, blending the retro vibes of the 80s with the
Now, what we're
tantalizing tunes.
theorizing at this point,
And so, the
which we've
adventures
proven
of
from
the
the
Val
esoteric,
Hills gang became the stuff of legend, a timeless tale of
that the
friendship.
thermistor rod, the temperature sensor, the temperature rod, acts like an antenna for the door. It acts like a door antenna out of phase. That's the dead orgone. The humidity sensor acts as an antenna for the orgone. Of course, this parallels the whole idea of, you'll see in esoteric circles, people use salt water solutions with different electrodes in them to detect these energetics with a fair degree of success. Looks like here, Wright took it much further. Now, the pressure sensor is essentially what they call a barrel switch, or a pressure-sensitive cycling switch. As the thing would rise, the pressure would change, and the needle in the little barometer would go across a switch segment, with the segments of a switch. That drove a relay that would in sequence put either the temperature or the humidity sensor back and forth. It would switch between these two sensors. Then it was switched to, which I'll explain in a minute how it's done, to what they call a reference mode in the transmitter. So what they have, as this thing rises and goes above the earth, it transmits a signal that destroys the door, and also transmits a signal after that, or before, however you look at it, that builds up the orgone energy. Now, let's consider the transmitter. The transmitter is a very interesting little beast. It is two oscillators. An oscillator that runs at the carrier frequency, the 403 megahertz or 1680 megahertz. There's a second oscillator, which is a 7 megahertz oscillator coupled into the grid of the carrier oscillator. Now, the control grid of the modulation oscillator, the 7 megahertz oscillator, has an RC network that causes to do the relaxation number. Now, as the oscillator runs, it builds up DC across the grid when the capacitor that's in the RC network for the relaxation oscillator. I have to apologize, I don't have any schematics with me. I didn't expect to talk of this, but there was interest at the table. As that capacitor will build up high enough in charge to put a high negative bias on the grid of the tube, cut the tube off, the oscillator will stop oscillating, of course. The RC network will discharge and pull the voltage down on the capacitor just like a neon bulb oscillator. So essentially that 7 megahertz oscillator would pulse on and off. Now, the lower the resistance, the faster the pulsing would be, and the higher resistance, the slower the pulsing would be. I'm trying to make this as clear as I can without having a schematic to point out. I know, are the two people here following what I'm saying that have some technical background? Now, they did not couple the 7 megahertz directly into the grid of the carrier oscillator. It couples into an RC network where the first resistor is in series with the plate coil. It's between the B plus and the B plus end of the plate coil. They have a capacitor going to ground, a bypass capacitor that integrates the function. Then they RC couple with a series capacitor and a resistor going to ground on the oscillator of the carrier oscillator. Well, what happened, whenever the modulation oscillator would click in, turn on, it would cut off the carrier oscillator and shut it off. Of course, etheric signals are already differentiated. So it means when you put the differentiated signal through the integrated network, it comes out in its real form in that final amplifier, that final oscillator.
Wouldn't that circuit also attenuate the instantaneous spike? In other words, this de-emphasis network?
Yes.
That's what the oscillator. That was the intent, wasn't it? Primary oscillator. We
don't know what the intent was behind it. That's what it appears to be. It's an integrator, which is a de-emphasis.
Right.
A differentiator is your emphasis network. In engineering, as a technician, you talk de-emphasis and emphasis. In engineering, we talk of integration and differentiation. And being trained in that's what I talk of. So the etheric signal or the hyperspatial signal, the orgone is already differentiated. It can't do anything. It's 90 degrees out of phase to begin with. This integration network brings it back in phase for the transmitter to transmit it. Now, also, you have to keep in mind that when the tube goes from a semi-saturated mode, as it is when the carrier oscillator is oscillating the cutoff, there are other things taking place from the zero-point potential. When the tube is cut off, any of the etheric signal that's stored in the tube will be pushed out the antenna. Also, when you cut the tube off, and you go from saturation to cutoff, and from cutoff to saturation again, you're essentially ripping open the vacuum from the viewpoint of the Dirac space that he derived in the 30s. And you'll get an amplification. These transmitters only put out about a half a watt of CWRF power. The etheric content, or the non-real power, was equivalent to about 250 watt transmitter. That's how efficient these little things work.
Can you describe the phase relationship between the RF output power and the etheric power and the frequency difference between the two?
Okay, the frequency should be the same. The phase relationship.
Cosine? Would be a cosine function?
Let's see, what will it be? It would have to be, let's see, it would come out of the differential equation relating the baseband to the carrier frequency. They could be a tangent. It's a tangent function.
So it rise sharply
Yeah.
until the next cycle.
That tells you that sends out the etherics in bursts. In other words, when this transmitter runs, the CW part of it, when the oscillator is on, it doesn't put out much etheric. But at the point where the oscillator shuts off, it sends out a huge burst of etheric signal. That's your tangent function. I just had to think for a minute on what it would be to answer your question.
I have a totally different question. Who was in charge of this project, the door boxes? What department of the government?
This was under United University's Brookhaven National Lab that was eventually turned over to the Signal Corps. But most of these things were U.S. Army Signal Corps stuff. Even the one set up from the Weather Service was Signal Corps. The Signal Corps had ultimate charge of it.
So as you're talking about this whole system, how does that now get into what was happening in the 40s and the 80s?
Okay, let's finish this off a little. Where was I? Questions always break the train of thought.
You were describing basically
Alright, the government could not tell the public that these things were weather control devices. They were keeping that secret. How'd they guard the secret? Two ways. They first showed a few receiving stations constructed to receive these things, put out that line. The personnel that launched them would laboriously calibrate them. Thirdly, the special tube that's in the radiosondes, they would list in the tube manual as a whole bunch of baloney. Essentially, they'd be saying that only a few hours of light. That means that the ham over there picked one up, looked at the tube manual, the 7533 is only going to last a few hours, he's not going to use it. And that worked very well. As I already mentioned, I've never seen a receiver. That says they didn't use a receiver with these things. This is why this is the hard data, besides the psychic data I base that the story is correct. Alright, what we're seeing here actually is in actuality the genesis of the Montauk Project. The Montauk Project was Phoenix 2. The Montauk Project is a combination of Wilhelm Reich's work and the Philadelphia experiment. It was like two separate little projects going on in Phoenix 1. You had the development of the invisibility and its human factor study. Also, you had the development of Wilhelm Reich's weather control.
So that was Phoenix 1?
Yeah, that's Phoenix 1, and they converged. Towards the end of the Phoenix Project, by using some of Wilhelm Reich's concepts and some of the modulation schemes gleaned from the Radiosonde Project, coupling, I know you're looking puzzled, this is what I found last week. Coupling that to the equipment that was used on the boat in the later invisibility project, they found out to couple the two, you now could use this for mind control. I'm not saying mood alteration. I know government circles would rather have me say mood alteration. Here I'm calling a spade of a spade. Mind control. That's what these idiots were doing. They're not actually idiots. That's what these people were doing.
That's what the Montauk Project was?
No, the Phoenix 1.
Phoenix 1.
The end of Phoenix 1, of course, what happened? Congress, the political government heard, hey, these guys are playing with mind control. They don't want that. So they told them, hey guys, cut it out. We don't want you looking into mind control. That's a no-no. So of course, the project was stopped. It was shut down. Does anyone here think it was really shut down? No, of course not. the people that were running this project went to the military and said, hey, we got this neat little project going. We can eventually use this to influence the mind of the enemy to give up and to surrender. We need a place to do this. We got to do this undercover now. So, of course, the military, they love the idea. They'd love something throw a switch and the enemy puts down all their weapons and comes up hands in the air. They love this. So the military was sold a bill of goods. And the military was said, okay, you can use the old Montauk Air Force Base. It's dead, it's derelict. Also, some of the equipment you requested is on that base, the old Sage radar. So the base was shut down, everything was auctioned off, but the Sage radar was left behind. And the whole group moved from the Brookhaven Labs out to Montauk. That's Phoenix 2. Of course, they spent the first 10 years from about 1969 to about 1979 researching pure mind control. They started out by taking the output of the Sage radar, modulating it into special ways that they came up with that Reich had shown them from the weather control process, and combining that with stuff they noticed from the Philadelphia experiment work and the stealth work. And they were hitting these poor bastards with the microwave beam out of the Sage transmitter direct. Sage transmitter transmitted about 400 megahertz, 406 megahertz, I believe most of the time it was set at. It would hop around frequency a little, it would change in phase, it was pulse modulated. They used the amplidyne concept where you had many stages pulse modulated, each one would pulse slightly different to build a form in the final stage.
You know, is it specific pulse width or frequencies of pulse width?
PRF was anywhere from 10 cycles to about 750 cycles. The pulse width, depending upon how they loaded up the capacitors, the voltage could be varied anywhere from about 10 microseconds to about 75 microseconds. The center frequency was 406 megahertz, generated from a stay-low type function, which was referenced from a zero-time function.
Was there any other modulation on this, phase modulation?
There was phase modulation, there was frequency hopping on it. Now this is as I saw it when I got on the station. I'm first trying to account what our digging and citing and digging and talking to different people told us was the genesis of this thing. Let's keep all the technical questions till later. Okay?
So let me explain out the chronology. Phoenix 2, then it would start in 1969.
Yeah, about 69, 70, 71, somewhere in there.
Phoenix 1 went from basically from World War
48 to 68.
to 68.
Now, essentially, the first part of the mind control project was to take an individual, such as Duncan here, stand them maybe 250 feet away from that antenna. As I was starting to go into what the Sage radar was capable of, the Sage radar had a peak pulse power of 0.5 megawatt. That's in the antenna. The antenna had a gain of 30 dB. So that means you're a megawatt. It has a peak pulse power, effective radiated power of at least a gigawatt. This is nominally a gigawatt. Can you imagine what that would do to people? I think it's amazing that the people are still here today that have been hit with this. It does such things as burn out brains, function, neurological damage, and you look inside of a person's lung that had this done, it'll look like the lung is all scarred from the heat generated, and just goes on and on with physical damage done to the body by this sort of thing. They tried this with a number of people, a few survivors, in this sort of thing.
Where they get the volunteers for that?
They were just grabbing indigenous people off the street and throwing in front of the radar beam and let's see what happens. That's the sort of nonsense that the government loves to do.
Who was in charge of the project at this time? It was covered now.
Mr. Jack Pruitt was in charge. All right.
Along with Dr. John Van Neumann.
Any particular agency?
I'm not sure what the agency was.
Hmm.
Now, somebody got the brilliant idea, upon the urging of the different people, they got the idea. We're not sure who came up with this idea first. The signal they really want goes through the reflector. Let's take the big banana peel, that's what it's called, reflector, turn around 180 degrees and put the subjects directly in line with the game horn feeding the antenna. Lo and behold, they got their result and then burned the people up. The poor bastards survived and they hit them with this signal. But they found out by varying the phase modulation, the frequency hopping, and the pulsing of the multiple stages, that they could have profound effects on a person's mind.
Can you describe something?
I think these two gentlemen here could describe them much better than I can. But let's not go into that at this point. Yeah, why not? Let's at this point break from the technical description of the first, what I consider to be the real mind control work that they had done that was successful. Let's go into some of the effects. Mr. Bielik and Mr. Cameron, I think, can do more on this than I can.
That was the goal in mind control of this whole project.
That was the started goal.
That was the first goal.
Yeah.
And how many people more or less worked on that all together on the base? Approximately.
That varied.
About 30.
What 30?
Who authorized them to go on base? Who authorized them use the base?
Air Force. The Air Force and the Navy.
Air Force and Navy?
In conjunction?
No.
Air Force and Navy work together?
Yeah, this was a joint project. There was both Navy personnel on it and the Air Force personnel on it.
Yeah.
We even have copies of the orders of the Air Force personnel.
What was the cover story for the base?
They had none.
No?
It was a derelict base.
It was abandoned. It was turned over to GSA as surplus
In 1970.
around 69, 70 when they shut down all the stage radar systems. In other words, there was a non-existent operation.
Right.
There was no government coverage for it. There was no government payment. There was a surplus base which allegedly had nothing on it. It was the perfect cover.
Where'd they get the funding?
Totally private.
Yep.
Private corporations?
Potentially.
It didn't originally come from corporations. It did in the later phases. The original money came from the Nazis, the Nazi government. In 1944, there was a
That was
raid.
Phoenix 1.
No, this is
that wasn't Phoenix
No, not
1.
Phoenix 1. This is Phoenix 2 and Phoenix 3.
Really?
Yep.
In 1944, there was an American troop train that went through a French railroad tunnel carrying $10 billion in Nazi gold, which they had found. This is documented in a movie on the old Patton scenario. in which this train was dynamited in the tunnel, killed 51 GIs, and of course Patton, who was then in Europe, decided he had to investigate this. He couldn't understand how an American troop train in the Western Territory was dynamited in a French railroad tunnel. And he was concerned about the loss of 51 GIs. And also, as it turned out, $10 billion in gold disappeared. That was $10 billion in the valuation of the then existing European prices of $20 per ounce, not 400. The gold disappeared. It turned up 10 years later in the U.S. at Montauk. This has been verified since. And that money, that gold, was used to finance the project initially and for many years because the value went up, as the value of gold went up, to approximately 100 billion plus. And they spent all and ran out of money.
That's when they tapped IGT.
And that's when they tapped IGT, who then from that point on funded it because IGT was owned by a certain German group known as the Crooks.
Okay.
And that was, again, the same Nazi connection. Now, in terms of personnel, many of the scientists, the civilian people and scientists there, were all ex-Nazis who came from Nazi Germany, either after the war was over with Werner von Braun, or was snuck in before the war, as was Dr. Unterman and a few others. But the whole thing was basically a civilian project run by the Nazis with the U.S. government surveillance, you might say. The intelligence community knew what was going on. The CIA monitored everything, as probably did other government intelligence agencies. But the field of players, if you will, those who actually operated on the base was small, 30 to 50. And the funding was entirely private. At a very later stage, after the whole thing was over, that means after 83, there was some investigation started by a certain senator from Arizona, I think his name was Goldwater. They couldn't find any trace of government funding, no government oversight committees, no payments of money of any kind, no appropriations, nothing. They went absolutely bananas trying to figure out how to project that magnitude and that scope could have been funded when there was no government money.
Thing the senator would like to know.
That's right. The Pruitt was Air Force. He was an Air Force colonel, by the way.
How did you get Air Force personnel assigned to a derelict base?
Right. Pruitt had his office in the Pentagon. I found that out through other connections. And he was the basic director through the whole of Phoenix 2 and 3, though actually they had two directors. They had the so-called psychic metaphysical director, which was Pruitt, and they had a hardware electronics director. It was originally Dr. Van Neumann. And after he left, Dr. Unterman took over, Hermann C. Unterman from Germany. And they also had an electronics expert who, through most of the period of time, was a Dr. Matthew Lee Zarrett, who came in with Werner von Braun in 46. In fact, I understudied the man, strangely enough, in New York College of Engineering in Newark, New Jersey. He was my college prof there. And I didn't know a thing about his connections or his background or that he had come from Germany. Lo and behold, he turns it there. Private funding all the way until, well, actually 100%.
That's 78.
Until it was over, there was still private funding through ITT.
Honestly, yeah.
The government never spent a cent on it.
The gold, I think, ran until about 78.
Approximately
He
that.
got heavily in about 78, 79.
One of the reasons why they ran out of money was the fact that there was eventually not one base, but 25.
Yeah.
All SAGE bases, 25 of them were utilized for the same program. They were running in parallel. And eventually they shut down until the end, I believe. That is the info we have, is there were only 3 still operational and they were tied together by satellite.
But they shut down quite late in the program.
Yeah.
How recently were they operating? When did they finally shut down?
The last of them shut down August 12, 1983,
That was Montauk.
and that was Montauk. It was the final one. When it went down, it shut the other two or whatever that were still operating with it via satellite down. So
When Montauk went down, they had to go down because that's where they got the zero time. from,
correct.
Was from Montauk.
Montauk was the key station.
So they automatically went down. All right, so
But you asked, or the question was asked, what about some of the mind effects?
yeah,
I'll try to answer that and say, from what I recall of the program, because I was part of it also, as well as the company,
As an officer or a civilian who was used?
used is the correct term, very definitely used.
most of the guys they used.
Well, yes, I was subjected to the, let's say, the mind control field, not as I initially went in the program, because they wanted me at one point in my psychic and metaphysical abilities, and you don't subject a person who is a sensitive to those kind of fields, because they know they will wipe them out, or alter them so drastically that they're useless. But they assigned me to a particular part of the program involving the indoctrination of the younger recruits, put it that way. And after, let us say, one of the first attempts at indoctrination, which turned out to be a total disaster, I said, there's no way I will have any part of this program, no matter what you do or say. They said, oh, yes, you will. And I said, well, no, I won't. So they put me in front of this roasting oven, if you will, the mind beam, and it did do damage to me. And finally somebody else said, shut it off. He isn't going to give in to it. I suffered some damage, but not severe damage as some others did. And it did affect me to some extent. Duncan was affected much more heavily for other reasons. But nevertheless, the effects were, in some cases, totally disastrous. They burned brains out and the people just dropped dead. Now, neither of us were among those category, but there were other recruits, young kids they picked up, you might say, off the streets, where they could find them. The basic age bracket was between 12 and 16.
So that's where a lot of the disappearing
Yes.
kids.
10,000, we estimate, went to Montauk. Total number would be about 250,000 with 25 stations estimated. What the actual final directives, what the final thrust of the program was in terms of these kids, we had never come up with the answers. They wanted them fully programmed for something, and we had never found out why. And eventually they disappeared off the station. It was sent to various locations and places. But they were initially subjected to one form of programming, and then later on it changed into a somewhat more humane, a somewhat faster and less obtrusive form of programming and conditioning using the electronic techniques. The original was Reichian and was more physical and was less sophisticated. The later programs, after they worked out the techniques to use computers, electronic programming, and the electronic use of the Reichian techniques, and became very fast, very quick, and usually took very well with no side effects. And these kids would never know what happened to them. They shipped them back to where they got them or to where they wanted them to go. They would know the better.
Are you aware of the names or identities of the present locations of any of the individuals?
I've run into a number of people over the years, let's say in the last 3 years, since I've become aware of the program and the fact that I was part of it. There is a very specific field identity pattern you can detect. If you're sensitive enough to read human auras, you can spot a person that's been through the Montauk program 5 miles away. Their auras are very distinctive in the way that they have been altered. You can tell them immediately if you know what you're looking for. And I've spotted many. I would say over a dozen. Mostly in the Long Island, New York area.
Wasn't, von Neumann was officially dead, right? Well,
Correct. Officially, he was dead, but he was very much alive throughout this entire program, all the way through '83 and for quite some time after that, up until this year, through this year.
Oh, he's passed on after that?
Don't know exactly the whole story of what's happened to von Neumann since, because he ran into a problem with the government, and he ran into two problems. One, he suffered a personality split himself about 1977. Whether it was because of some of the experiments he was on or the strain, we don't know. But he resigned as director. That he was no longer fit. The government wouldn't leave him alone. They wouldn't let him leave. They said, you will remain as a consultant, which was agreeable to him for the balance of the program. Those are other reasons why he had to be there, which goes back into the whole Philadelphia experiment. But he remained on as a consultant. At the end, he told them, he said, when this program is over, he says, I'm not going to work for the government again ever, no matter what you say. He says, I'm through with you. He said, I don't want to be part of any of your government operations. And he retired to his little farm and led a relatively peaceful life for a period of time until he was harassed again in the last year and a half. That's not part of the Montauk thing.
Was he living under another name then?
When
Under a pseudonym.
when did he officially die?
1957.
50.
That's the official death date.
What happened to the other scientists? Brought food and was it intimate?
Groot was there until '83.
Yeah.
And then he went and worked in different corporations and disappeared.
Eisenman was seen to turn up. You ran into him.
Yeah, a couple of times, that was it.
Yeah, and then he
Other than he
disappeared.
ran for the hills.
Most of them did. They ran for the hills.
Well, let's continue on the description of the Phoenix Project.
I just have one more question about the Montauk. Were any of the subjects given psychotropic LSD?
I don't know.
We don't believe so.
My gut feeling is no.
In conjunction with the.
I don't believe they were.
They used other drugs. They had one drug that would be used in connection with the Reich programming. It would make them more receptive.
This was not.
Do you know the name of the drug, the chemical name or the generic name?
No, I don't.
I have no knowledge
Can
of
you
that at all.
describe any of the effects of that alone or in conjunction with the...
Okay, the effects would make you horny as hell.
Uh-huh.
That's essentially what it would do. It would make you very sexually active.
Also euphoric at the same time.
Yeah.
And euphoric?
Well, that would go along with it.
Right.
What was the purpose of being euphoric?
All right. Essentially, I don't.
Or they get chairs, you know?
We're not sure whether they got the chair itself from the aliens, but the
They get
technology
prototype,
base
you know.
came. Yeah, the prototype came from the aliens.
Willingly or
Produced
from a craft
Maybe.
Exchange. Sorry.
We don't know.
Also, I had another question on what you were describing before. Could this experience that is becoming very common of the UFO abduction could have been programmed by the government under this mind control?
Sure, it could be. Not all of it is, but some of it probably is.
Some of it.
All right. But they got this chair from the aliens. In some connection. Another associate of ours was on the station managing money, and he actually went out and bought this chair from somebody. He hasn't been able to dig out yet who. So, what they essentially did is they took this chair, they made one computer to interface the chair itself, the standard digital codes, and then another computer to interface it to a special computer to the transmitter, and then the transmitter. What they actually ended up with, in essence, was a mind amplifier. Duncan here, his major responsibility on the station. He was one of the selected individuals. He had been through a lot of psychic training by the government to sit in that chair and generate thought form. The idea they had is, okay, they can transmit the signature digitally. That worked very well. They could put the person in the orgasmic state digitally. That worked very well. But they wanted a human being to generate the actual thought form, the details of what they wanted done.
From the chair.
From the chair, yeah. In other words, they would put into Duncan's mind, when he's in a trance, what they want him to think of, what they want him to think of that he's doing. The chair would pick it up. After the data was sent that would turn on the target individual, his thoughts are channeled directly through the transmitter to the individual. It worked, but it didn't work. It worked very well, extremely well. But they found another capability. Let's say they would target Phil at Tuesday, 4 a.m. when he's asleep. You might actually discover that Phil was actually hit 2 weeks later. What did they discover? They did not block the time in of the person. What did they get? They got a time machine. Next right idea they got was, okay, let's tell Duncan to think of a vortex connecting 1981 to 1947. He will do this. What happened? They got a vortex going from 1981 to 1947. You can walk through. Great. Now,
Duncan had to be, you have to be really good to be able to visualize. And
Duncan's very good at
you have to
visualizing.
be really immense, I would think.
Well, let's not go into that at this point.
Well, you're talking about it at this point, that's why I bring it up.
A master is a word in the dictionary.
Word I use. If you want.
Well, we're talking of earlier capabilities, not today. He was also raped over as well. But, you know, what they discovered is, okay, the real time he thought of it, what they discovered is they recorded it, put the tape on the computer, did the same thing again. So now they had a tape that would open a vortex. And they started going back in time, they started going ahead in time, they actually got the time machine. That's the last phase of the Phoenix project, was the time machine. Of
And
course,
they could control that time factor to where they wanted to
Yep.
go.
whatever he thought of, or other people like it. He wasn't the only one. They had to have at least 5 backups.
So it's still phase 2.
That was phase 3.
Phase 3.
Yeah, was the time machine.
Now, that time machine, what do you know the date?
That got going about 79 to 80. They got that operational. Of course,
Fully operational?
yeah, about 79 to 80.
Good, both matter and,
Thought,
signals.
yeah, right. They had this, you can walk through the vortex. You can walk in 1981 and come out in 47.
Who, the cameras would, or the one?
Anyone.
Can you explain
I don't-
how this was developed?
What was the mechanism behind it?
First of all, this transmitter was so freaking powerful. This transmitter had enough power to warp space and time, go through Bearden's equations. There's more than enough power to do it. He had the capability of thinking of the vortex function that they couldn't synthesize. They didn't know how to synthesize that vortex function, but he knew. Innately, inherently, he knew how to do it.
Can it be mechanically synthesized right now?
I'm sure they got the tapes. I'm sure they got the tapes. Well, also things they did was they would have the subject sitting in the chair think of a creature. And that creature would precipitate itself. They would have the subject think, there's a car coming up the road, stop the car. The car would stop, there'd be no electrical activity in it. They would have the subject in the chair think of change the direction of the fish. And the fish would do this sort of thing. They would have the subject think all the animals on Montauk Point are going to charge into the town. There's records of that even to this day, of all animal life coming off the point charging into the town. There'd be, you talk to the local kids, now they're young adults out at Montauk, that lived out at Montauk, you'll find out there's rumors of kids hearing big things stomping around the woods on the point. That's what came out of somebody's mind, precipitated through this huge mind amplifier. They almost had the power of creation. They could almost create a being. The problem they had is the being only stayed as long as the transmitter was on. Flip the switch. The being stopped all its mobility and faded back into hyperspace. But that's how powerful this thing was. This thing, you're talking gigawatts, and the etheric power probably many, many terawatts. You're talking astronomical etheric power. Because they're using multiple pulse modulated amplifiers on top of pulse modulated amplifiers, opening different windows from the drive of this amp to that amp, and you can encode all sorts of zero-point functions as you go through what they call the amplidyne function. The amplidyne is essentially a zero-point amplifier. So by the time they started pulsing the 100-watt stage, by the time they got out to the half a gigawatt output, the etheric power was up in the sky. This thing was tremendous. This transmitter, it took at times 2 generators supplying a megawatt each to run this thing. They were pumping 2 megawatts into this whole building, which you'll see pictures of. But, I don't think I can overstate how much power, as far as we're concerned in this room, it's astronomical power this thing had. This thing literally had, if the person who was sitting in the chair thought of a time warp and a vortex, that vortex would form.
Excuse me, does this have any military applications that you're aware of? Good question.
I can think of thousands.
And is that why you're almost free today? Because the Russians are simply scared of this? I don't know.
Who knows? There's also other thoughts that other outside groups are saying to the Earth government you straighten up or ship out.
Who knows? You said people could walk through this time vortex.
Yeah, right.
Did you ever walk through the time vortex?
No comment.
Do you know anybody that did that?
Oh, yes.
Could you describe at least the experience or?
Ow.
Yeah, I can. Okay. I did more than once. And it's weird. To say the least. The recollection is that you...
First of all, how is it formed? Just at the beginning, before it's created, what do you see before it's created?
Before it's created, you see nothing but the building or the area that you're in.
You're in a chair or
No.
Open space?
No, what they finally ended up doing was they took whatever Duncan or his alternates would generate, they put it on tape.
Okay.
It could generate it inside the underground area, or it could generate
From anywhere to anywhere.
Anywhere generate it outside. It can be from any particular point where they chose to generate the origin, and it would go to the terminal point.
That's why you were,
Where?
The terminal point would be wherever they chose it to be.
and you could be driving a car.
You
What
jerk
would
the
happen?
path.
You probably,
I mean, what would happen if you were driving a car?
Your car will go through it.
if your car went into the entrance of it, yes, the car would go through it. And come out at the other end where it was. It'd be 100 or 1,000 or 100,000 years in the future or the past.
You would actually.
I'm wrong.
This car that other time to just drive like that.
Whatever went in the beginning, the entrance would come out the other end.
I'm wrong computer modeling.
I'm sorry?
Could the car be spatially dislocated? Could it be somewhere else in the universe?
Sure good.
Yes.
I run computer modeling based upon calculations I've learned from radio songs and such. And the vortex could have a diameter of about 5 miles. Would be a 5-mile opening. Or of course they could bring it down.
We can send all of Long Island.
No.
What was it like, Al? You were saying.
It's like looking into the entrance of a peculiar spiral tunnel which was lit all the way down. You would start to walk into this thing, and then suddenly you'd be pulled down it, and you would more or less be projected. You didn't walk through it as such. You were more or less propelled through it.
You walked into it.
You walked into it, correct, to start. Then you were propelled down the thing like some force grabbed you and pulled you through, and you come out the other end, wherever it is. You could be far in the past, you'd be in the future, it could be very close by, and it could definitely be another place, physically, other than the point where you started and usually was.
Wherever whatever point in space and time the transmitter was set to transmit to.
Emphasize space and time because it could be anywhere in the universe.
You go back or forward in time?
Either way.
Were you physically there? Could you interact with other things?
Yes.
Yes.
You could take remnants back with you. You could take a set, like for example, if you project yourself to go to another planet, you could bring something back with you.
Yes, you could.
If you could live on the other planet.
Get right. I can't answer that for certain, but I would say probably.
Have you ever personally brought anything back from another time, either past or future?
Yes.
Was it a terrestrial origin or?
Yes, in this case it was terrestrial origin. It was a Life magazine in the year 1983 to take it back to 1943, but that's part of the Philadelphia story.
That's still continuing the Phoenix Project, yeah.
I'll be.
You guys asked the question of what was
Okay,
like.
the description of the vortex, please continue.
Well, the description was it was like a tunnel, coruscating corkscrew, sort of lit, sort of looked like the walls were,
Solid or moving?
they were solid, but they were fluted. It was not a solid bore through rock, as you would think. It was a fluted sort of structure. And we'd go down this, and you would be propelled down this tube, as it were, this tunnel, which was not straight. It was corkscrew. And it would not go in a straight line either. It would take some very strange turns, which would not explain. But it did take turns, and it would come out at the other end, wherever you were supposed to come out, and meet somebody or do something at the other point.
And you have like a mission?
Yes. Then you would return. And when whatever you were doing was completed, the tunnel would reopen for you, and you go in the other direction. You walk back in it and go back to where you came from.
Exact reverse of what happened when you lived there.
If someone switched off the power, would you be able to get back?
No.
No, you'd be lost in
You'd be
the
stuck there.
space.
You never get back.
You would not get back.
People were lost.
That's what I was asking.
People were lost.
Wow.
I've heard of that.
Was everyone who went through one of these programs?
Possibly.
Possibly, we don't know of all of those people, those young kids who were programmed, what the final intent was. We only have a little glimmering of part of it now, and this is in the last week or two, and it's very incomplete. It's been a mystery to us for a long time. What was the end goal of all of these kids being programmed? What did they want to do with them? And 10,000 there and all the other stations? There had to be a reason.
When you said people were lost, does that mean that if the machine was turned off, instant disintegration or just abandoned in that time period?
Well, it depends on which happened first. In other words, if they went down the tunnel and got to their termination,
They were fine.
they were fine. And if the tunnel was turned off and they couldn't get it refocused to that area in time, then the person was lost there. They were abandoned, so to speak, and
They were
trapped
floating
in
in
that time or
hyperspace.
location. If the tunnel disintegrated while they were in transit, they were lost. That's
And if they
disintegrated.
were abandoned in time,
Yeah, they could be abandoned.
and this is going to be a sort of a philosophical question,
Yeah.
wouldn't they be angry and do something really wild to alter the future?
Depends on where they were abandoned.
Well, they did not abandon people in time. The problem was that the transmitter would glitch, and as you were in transit from time 1 to time 2, the tunnel would collapse,
Yeah.
and you were lost.
You might be lost intact, you might be lost in a form of being atomically disintegrated, in which case you were totally lost.
But the philosophical question is valid. I mean, where you would go back in the past, could you alter the future?
Sure you can.
Of course.
Has it been done?
And if they don't, that's
Yes, they were.
That's the reason we exist in a time loop right now. What we do from one end to what Montauk penetrated in the past to what we do to where Montauk penetrated in the future is now fixed. Because it's fed back on itself. It's now fixed. It's fixed right now. It has to be because of that. It has to be fixed.
You went forward in time.
Went forward and backwards, though. One of the first things they did was the raw recruits, as it were, after they passed the initial tests and examination to see if they were suitable for the program, and were found suitable. I don't know what the reason was, but I do remember that one of the things they did was they sent every raw recruit forward into the future to a year around 6030 AD, and was always to the same point. Someplace in the future, in the middle of an abandoned city with a square where there was still a statue in solid gold. And they would ask them to look at this and see what they saw after they came back. And they interpreted whatever the individual saw, for what purpose, I'm not sure, but this was one instance where apparently all recruits were sent to this point in time to see what they saw and whether they were expecting to find a different answer, and from person to person, I don't know.
Were they equipped with protective suits or equipment?
No, ordinary clothes.
That's if they were going to a friendly environment.
Yeah.
Well, if you're sending someone into the future, you know, if it was possibly nuclear or...
Well, they first would look into the future through the vortex. They could sample the air, they could sample everything on this side.
You know, were there different potential futures that people could be sent to?
No, because once you make the first connection into the future, it's fixed. Anything from that future point back is fixed.
But what I'm saying is, are there
That's
different
the reason the
futures
government
that they could go
times
into?
the first projection. Yes, there's multiple different futures. But once the first projection is made into the future, from that point back, from the future, let's say they project from 83 to the future.
Okay.
From this point back, it's not fixed. Because the fact that he went from here to here has not fixed the point.
Even after they turn off the machine or whatever?
Because the fact they turned off the machine does not alter that he was here and then came back.
Then that sounds like you couldn't change the present by sending someone to the past.
Yes,
Vice
you
versa.
can. You can, yes.
Yes. You can
Exactly.
change the present by sending someone into the future, too, for that matter.
Yep.
Not
How
all
do
of
you
them
change the
certain-
present by sending someone into the future?
Under certain conditions, you can.
Well, it's a closed loop, you can.
Cameron, had you gone into the future at all?
Yes. I've seen the horse, which Al speaks of. It's
Oh, the golden statue.
the golden statue. It's a horse with no rider. It's an abandoned city. It's sort of like a dream state. It's very peculiar where there's virtually no dynamic ability ongoing. It's a very stationary, almost frozen state.
No markings on the statue, no, you know what it was, what it was.
I don't think I can say.
Beyond that, if you want to make any statements about anything else in the future that might interest people, or that you could talk about without doing damage?
Only in the fact that when there is a function that is presented ahead, there are increments that from that particular point in time, which was propagated from, there will be effect back to the initial point of reference. That is the nature of the beast. As Patson spoke, once you have a reference,
Once you close the loop.
whether it be ahead or behind, that doesn't necessarily mean that that particular point in the future cannot be changed. Everything and nothing is possible. So,
If there were changes that were going on in the future, you can't really do much about that yourself, could you?
That's correct.
Could it be just like a projection or something, or not the real future? Some kind of
If something
on the mind?
To answer the question, depending upon what realism set of functions, how will they be real or manifested or surrealistic, depending what function and what time line. There are many timelines and functions of realism. Depending where you're going and where you attribute the point of reference, that determines how it will affect, as let's say you and I here, as to us here directly. The realistic point, how much that, let's say it's a manifested realism. That could have some effect here, but not that dramatically. As something, let's say, us sitting here 20 years ahead, that is in our space and framework and function of time, so that would affect us more dramatically into something that was sort of created.
Okay, say that one psychic sets up a vortex to the future and we use that and then we shut that one down. If another psychic sets up a vortex to the future, will it go to the same future or can it go to a different one?
they go to wherever the function is generated to go to.
That's correct.
Okay.
There had to be people who were really controlling it very exactly, specifically.
Oh, yeah,
Sure.
Very definitely.
Very much.
But what I'm saying is it'll go to a different place in time, but will it be on the same timeline, the same reality as the first psychic's vortex?
As long as it's before the most furthest point they projected
Okay.
ahead, yes, it will be. In fact, the government is using that today to, the existing time machines still flow in the Montauk line.
Okay, once they have done that, can we go back in time and change the past to change the present, and then the future will be changed?
You already did it. If the loop flows, everybody does automatically what they're supposed to do. If
The loop has
from
been
the
closed
future-
once you've gone to the future. So we don't have to worry about our present being changed now,
No, it can't be changed.
because we've already looped to the future through it.
and through the past.
Right.
If, let's say this is 83, let's say this is year 1, this is year 1000. And you go from 83 to year 1, from 83 to year, 2000. Anywhere between 2000 and 1, now you fed it back on itself. That means
So it's locked.
whatever the people do in here, they're going to do forever and ever. We're in an endless do loop in a computer right now.
What is the furthest forward anyone has traveled that you know of?
10,000.
So that's all locked through 10,000.
Unless the
Can you
vortex
describe
really broke.
can you describe any recollection of anybody you know that has traveled that far into the future?
Nobody has ever gotten that far in the future and gotten into a real, almost like a running life situation, so we don't know what it is. As Duncan described, it always appears to be like a dream state where they hardly ever encounter any other people.
What about, all right, as far as going into the future and encountering people on Earth, okay, how far ahead is that?
Near term.
I believe they've gone about 10,000 years ahead.
But you still,
But and encountered people.
no, what I'm saying is encountered something other than a dreamlike or a sublimated state. Interacted with
How
people.
far can you go and get a tangible, real future? Or can you do that?
No one's gotten a tangible, real future beyond 2012.
2012, 13, 14,
somewhere in there.
depends.
Does that indicate that maybe things have changed so radically at that time that there isn't anything else to see?
Something's happened.
There is a very, very abrupt wall there with nothing on the other side.
But the prophecies speak of the earth changes at those times.
Curious, isn't it?
Did you, in your travels, did you ever, Cameron, learn so much that for yourself it really was of value to you, not so much to others, but
Okay, you have to realize the intelligence at the particular time. I now can sit here and speak of this in a matter-of-fact terms. When the project having to do with out in Montauk was ongoing, I was very much not myself. In control of other people, functions, forms.
they control you.
I beg your pardon, that's correct. In the control of, I should say. So I gained only what
You wanted you.
that's correct, basically.
Did they also deprive you of sleep and food and things like this to make you more malleable? Or?
Basically, that's sort of corny.
Right.
I don't mean to demean your question,
No, I understand.
but it was very elementary, the
Right.
procedures that they did.
How long were you permitted to stay in the time period? Was it
Hour.
hours, minutes, seconds?
Sorry.
If you were put into a time period, forward or back, okay? How long were you permitted to stay there? How long would the vortex say, oh,
As long as they ran the transmitter.
Yeah,
I mean, what was the average, like, what was the mean time that someone would stay in the future? Minutes, seconds, days, hours?
I can't answer the
hard to
question
say.
is not answerable, considering
I mean, in
the
your
format for which we're
perception of
traveling.
time, in your perception of
No,
time.
There is no such
The people who run it.
consideration of perception of time during that period. It's
There
very.
It wasn't a deal where they were told you got an hour to do the job, you gotta be back within an hour.
Does that mean that when you went back, for the people on this side, it appeared you just went in and came right back
Yeah.
out?
No.
So,
Basically.
So you basically left and returned at the same time, no matter how much time you spent. Some went up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's true.
Yeah.
There were a few points where the thing glitched and you might have returned an hour later. But it wasn't meant to.
Basically, when you deal in the avenues of what Preston and Al call hyperspace, there is no such thing as time per se. It's some causality.
Right.
In theory and in function, you can return before you can start.
Right.
When they return you before you started, you don't remember what happened.
That
That's
Can't
one
happen.
of the
It did
ways they erase memories.
They did it intentionally.
Yeah.
Very.
They have you do a job, go through the job, and then they return you to maybe milliseconds before you started. At that point, it becomes an isolated loop. You're detached from it. You can't even attach the Akashic record from that.
Right.
What was the shortest period of time that you know of someone traveling forward in time? Enough time to see himself coming through the vortex?
okay, you're again asking Preston.
Okay.
He has information on such. I don't mean to demean your question.
I know that he has a lot of general information. You have specific information. So if anyone wants to answer that,
Mhm.
the shortest period of time, like for example, if there's seconds between the time you enter the vortex and the time you arrive, could you put yourself in the future? For example, could you put yourself in the future 20 seconds or a minute or 3 minutes and meet yourself?
Okay, what he's getting at is, can you project yourself, let's say, 2 hours in the future and then meet yourself 2 hours in the future?
Right.
Yes, you can. It's very dangerous.
Has it been done? You know.
No, it has not been done because when you walk through the tunnel, the way the tunnel was created, the person that walked in one end was out of phase with the person that walked out of the other end. If he met himself, poof, was gone.
Like matter and antimatter?
Yeah,
Very much.
like, but not quite like that.
Okay, just to add to something, what Preston says, in theory, this is what happens. Indeed, it did happen.
You did have.
Oh, sure. As a matter of testimony and procedure.
And the person did not survive.
Well, sure, it was literally just blown apart. It's just incinerated.
That's when they
To be
found
cornered.
out that the transmitter did the phase reversal number. They don't understand exactly what phase reversal it is. It's not normal phase reversal. So
Cameron, if the time you went into the future and you were in a point of danger, let's say in some situation you didn't expect, did you ever come across that sort of thing where, like that situation, right in the moment, whatever it was,
Well, on a metaphysical basis and theory, since I was educated in that sense, when you start moving through space and time, it is of necessity to start looking around and seeing what's going on, other than supposedly straight ahead. All different functions and violations of all sorts of things that go on.
breaking all sorts of laws,
really?
Oh, sure.
the physical laws.
To answer your question directly, though, I have passed myself in view, not made a connection of sort. You just don't do that.
Have you ever given anything to protect you against anything you would come across? If it was a life and death situation, as people go into the jungles and they have weapons, let's say, or you're on a mission, you have weapons. But you would go into the future, if you met something and you were really in danger, what would you do if you didn't have a weapon? Did they give you, did you carry such a thing?
Or would you have immediate access to the portal?
Okay, I think I could answer that.
I have no information on that.
I
I
think
can't
I
answer.
could answer that. First of all, they could design the vortex so it would follow him. And they could essentially view what's happening to him in the future. That means, this I do remember, I'm sorry. This I know happened. that they could follow the person in the future or the past. Anything dangerous start to happen, they just bring them back automatically. It was like a mission control where there was a group of people watching what went on, and they were able to talk to them. You could talk back to them. You know, they had set up so that when they speak into a mic on the station, he could hear it. Because they hear what he says to the speakers on the station. And they had a whole monitoring setup operational. And they also had the capability with the transmitter to run the vortex right over him and pull him back without him walking in it. They walk the vortex to him. If he started to encounter anything dangerous, he'd be pulled back and he'd be out of it.
Excuse me, put me down if I'm jumping ahead, but was the vortex that many of us have read first opened with the Philadelphia experiment in 1942, 43?
Yes.
Are you going to be talking about that later?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes, we will be. Soon as we can get over this hurdle here.
Right.
Why are you hurdle, you know?
It's a good size one.
Also, because I remember even that lecture when you first talked about it, the circumstances of which this project was canceled in such a...
But we haven't got that
in a
far.
panic situation. No, I know.
We haven't got that far. Let's at this point continue. We can.
Well, I got a related question real quickly. When you went into the future and saw the horse, was that by any chance something to scare you into agreeing to do what they wanted to prevent something, or?
It was more of a view, just to consider indeed what was there and critique.
Yeah.
So if they really wanted to know something.
A reference point.
Yeah, to test it.
It was a test, basically.
We're all getting the same answer.
They wanted to see if everybody came back with basically the same view, the same information. Test your powers of observation, whatever.
Okay.
What did you see? Describe it in detail. Not only the horse, but the surrounding city that was in ruins. Well, do you have any ideas why? Did you see anybody there? Did you see anything else?
So,
Et cetera, et cetera.
so when you would go through the vortex, if you were to go through right now, you disappear from this spot?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Very definitely.
You wouldn't be here.
Gotcha.
You just be on the viewers.
Right.
All right. Let's continue.
One more question, could the system of the vortex without the technological trappings but being something similar to how Nostradamus or the prophets or whatever were supposed to be?
Who knows?
I mean,
That's
speculating.
totally unknown.
I assume movies were sometimes taken in the past.
Well, movies will be made right off the viewers.
Oh, really?
They could do that off the viewer,
Sure.
like,
The viewer was the video signal. You put the viewer right onto a videotape machine.
Wow.
what kind of files must they have somewhere? All
You must have
Yes.
some great home
Good
movies.
question.
Somebody already had movies. All right.
Home movies.
Good one. What a pile of home movies.
Sounds like a title for a movie about this.
And question, do you have any of these tapes? No.
No. They were also guarded. I know the tapes were made because I saw them, but they were also guarded.
You saw the tape?
Well, I have to admit, I think I have to admit at this point, I was there too. I was the guy that built the transmitter. You know, rebuilt the transmitter.
That's,
See, they did the number on me where I would go to work. And then I would be taken out to Montauk. I'd do 10 hours work, then they would bring me back, run me back to millisecond or so before I left, and I never knew what happened. I had to reference to that period to pull my memories. And I have done it. I pulled most of the memories. That's how I can talk of the viewer. I was the one that designed and built the viewer. Plus, I had tremendous facilities behind me to do it. I can't do
Staff
it.
and information,
Not like
computers,
the garage.
No, not like my garage.
No,
educators.
To continue, all right, they got the working time portal, the working time vortex. Somebody on the station realized, hey, we're headed for a mess. We gotta stop this thing. Just like in the old movie Donovan's Brain, what was done was in one of the care subjects' minds, there was a little thought implanted that you're going to pull a monster out of the id, a monster out of the subconscious, and transmit it through the transmitter on site. And the person went in, lay down in the chair, went into this thing. And there was no one else in the room, which happened every once in a blue moon, but it did happen. This person snuck in and said, okay, the time is now, whatever the keyword was. At that point, the person unleashed through the transmitter the form, and the transmitter precipitated this huge, big, black, hairy thing that was hungry. It ate everything inside, buildings, people, ground, and they went into a panic when they couldn't control this thing and stop it. Pruitt says, shut the transmitter off. They go down to the power station, shut down the generators, throw the switches, freaking thing didn't stop. Kept going. It was still hungry and still eating.
This is on the base?
Yeah, on the base.
Actually, we're eating people and machinery and everything.
Yep.
and smashing everything you could get to
Buildings.
the site.
How big was the building?
About 30 foot tall.
Solid or?
Yeah, it was solid. Yeah. The transmitter had the capability to precipitate the thing. We knew at that point the transmitter could do it. And finally, Pruitt said, okay, you've got to go up and cut the wires that come out of the ground into the radar building. We cut those wires. We figured maybe there was wires got miswired on the ground and was getting power from somewhere besides the generator house. Cut the wire, freaking thing still continued to work. And then they kept going, they cut the wires inside the building. I had to go ahead a little. What had actually happened is they had made a connection on that day that Junior was released with the Philadelphia experiment. Somebody had to go shut off the Philadelphia generator. I will go into that. That's his field of expertise. When the generators are shut off on the Eldridge, then Pruitt was able to take settling torches and go up and cut the transmitter apart and monitor. You go out to this day, you'll see where there's settling torch marks and everything on the equipment.
You can go on the base now?
Yeah, you can.
Yeah, it's way up.
This was in 83.
Yeah, 83. August 12, 1983. Okay, at that point, anyone that was left, they dragged into a site that we won't disclose at this point and did a total brainwashing number on. So you didn't remember a thing. All of us sitting here were brainwashed, but we didn't remember anything. Except that he found his way to my place. And that's when the deprogramming started.
You were one of the two you spoke of on the tape, where somebody came to your house to tell you about what happened? Or what you spoke to Cameron or Al?
Cameron.
How did you happen to go to Preston's place, Cameron?
Directed or instinct or perchance, it's hard to say. There's a story that goes along with it. It's sort of long and bulky, but somehow it comes up that indeed I was directed to, still under influence and command, so to speak, to disrupt Preston's work.
At that point, they were getting worried about me because I was starting to stumble into non-talk in real life.
You were remembering things, or you were just, you had a case to
over
go?
the years, one of the problems with this thing that they set up although you don't remember any of the work you did, little bits and pieces of it filter through. I developed a huge interest in esoteric technology, psychotronics, psychic activity. I was researching this to the nth degree. I had a team of psychics working with me. We were trying to figure out what was the energy form and all this stuff. I knew in the mid-70s there was a source of psychic interference here on Long Island. And after a couple of years, I was able to trace it right out of Montauk. So I had my eye on Montauk for years. Of course, I could never get on there. The security was thick. Although it was a derelict base, there was security guards all over the place. And all I know is a friend of mine from out east called me and said, Preston, the old Montauk Air Base is wide open. Well, when do you want to go look? I said, tomorrow. And I was out there that morning with my friend. We walked all around. First thing, when military pulls out of a base, what do? They clean everything up, they take everything with them. There was junk strewn over the whole base. There were files dumped out of a file cabinet just filling one room in the big building, the floor of one room. Equipment was still left. Power was still on in sections of the base. You had to flip switches and the lights would come on. People gone. They just fled, zoom.
Because they were scared of this creature?
It wasn't Nutter County.
Right.
What happened?
That's your responsible military for
When
it.
the transmitter was shut off, was finally cut apart, the monster stopped animation and over a period of days just faded back into hyperspace. See, all these things were active, tunnels, creations, whatever, as long as that transmitter was functioning. Either it got power from the site or it got power from the Eldridge. It didn't matter where it got its power from.
What happened to this person who created this kid or whatever? Is that one of you?
I don't know if these guys want to say.
Well, information, there was a photograph that was taken just in routine basis out in Montauk that was presented in the first lecture, Preston in 85, 6. Chicago was it? USBA conference. There were random photos taken, and one of the gentlemen from Situ, is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is this? What does that stand for?
Society for the Investigation of the Unexplained.
He looked at a photograph and said there's something there unusual. There was a blow up of it, and there was a sort of what's been categorized as sort of like a Bigfoot. What I see on that is myself, as an image of myself riding the back of it. How much I'm very startled with the photograph for sure. It does seem to have a connection with me, even though I try to discredit.
Is this in one of these lights? One of these lights?
Yes, sir.
Is it?
It's in that collection of slides.
Ah,
It's in the side, very small.
So it feels
This
like
would
it's
be very
faint image. or something.
Right, a faint image.
This would be very similar to the quote-unquote it or the shadow or whatever
yeah.
psychological technique you want to use.
Yeah, just an add on here. Preston spoke of a 30-foot type creature. There are a number of images associated. 30 feet is by all means could very well be correct. 9 feet, 10 feet, depending which image is considered.
Also, perhaps how scared the individual was who saw it.
Well,
And
some
these
of the
tales
marks,
grow.
some of the marks on the buildings were up quite high. It
Yeah.
had to be like 30,
It
it
was
had
at
to be at least
least
25 feet
I would say
On the
at least
outside or
15,
inside?
probably more.
Outside.
There's
So,
still
I mean,
this-
it got outside and was attacking the building from the outside?
Oh, yeah,
All right.
it was rolling free.
Was it like a monkey size, big, like King Kong?
It was very similar
Or
in
like-
appearance to one of the Bigfoot,
Bigfoot.
which you showed, and I've seen pictures of on tour at various times.
But
and places.
huge.
But huge. Instead of being 7 foot, it was perhaps closer to 30. My original impression was, when I first went on the base, it was perhaps 30 foot high.
Now, to the best of your knowledge, how was this creature created yet? Was there some kind of, someone decided
It was
it
him.
to be created?
Yeah, some person, we're not sure who it was at this point, felt like the rest of us here that this was going too far, it was getting dangerous, and there was going to be problems in the future. It had to be brought to a stop. The project had to be crashed. And the most effective way to crash it was to make something hungry that would cause them to panic. Throw them into a panic.
Information that someone was tapped on the shoulder somehow and did some business to do this. Some information was passed along.
You wonder if you worked there at all or not, but you have been living with your folks a long time. Don't they know? Did you ever ask them what you were doing in these time
We
periods?
had no time loss. They returned them immediately
Just before it happened.
Yeah.
Before it happened. So he was never gone, even though he could have been out looking for himself.
I
the whole
came
time.
home
He was
from
not
work, so freaking tired.
gone.
So we essentially lived a couple of years in 1 year.
How do you make a living
I went
normally?
through the same
Let's
thing.
say outside of this project.
As a microwave engineer.
And you're still getting a check.
Oh, yeah.
They take away
I
everything.
come home from work, I felt like I'd worked 20 hours, 10 hours, 20 hours, anywhere
Probably
in there.
worked even more.
And since about 83, I haven't had that. Since 83, I've been fine. But from about 75 until 83, God was I tired. But I wouldn't remember any of it because they would bring me back to milliseconds before I left and it'd be a closed loop. But the experience and the education would come through. That's why I went into metaphysics. Because this other project, I was heavily in metaphysics. Originally, before that, I was a nuts and bolts electronics type person. I didn't even metaphysics. That was my reaction. But
This is for idiots type.
yeah,
thing.
but because I'd done so much in this other function, still enough filtered through that I developed an interest in this, what you want to call this life, if you want to say, of metaphysics. And that was their downfall. Because it was that made me conscious of what was going on. That Montauk was the source of these interfering signals. Of course they were interfering signals. They were following up my research and no end.
Was there any sense of all these experiences you were doing, going in the future, etc., all of that there was some real higher force around? There was a higher force that existed, sort of was more in control than the people were at the station. People have their little kingdoms and think that they rule the world in a sense, but as you were going through the experience, you sensed higher forces, much higher forces that really have something to say about destiny and how things go on this planet. Very mystical experience is what I meant in saying.
Well, Ms. Duncan is deferring to me on that one. I'll try to answer it. I would say that during that period itself, looking back on it, there was no awareness on my part, and I don't think there was any on Duncan's part, of such a higher agency, if you will, directing our efforts at that point. I would say very definitely there was before that point, and at some time in the past we were aware of it, but perhaps not in our respective earlier lifetimes, this lifetime, but further back. And since then, very definitely, that there was some kind of, if you will pardon the expression, a divine plan involved in this whole thing, which is very, very difficult to explain, very difficult to extrapolate on. There was a reason for all of this happening. I know that without any question. What that reason is still not clear. And I think Duncan would agree that, yes, he knows that there was some kind of a reason for it. Preston would probably agree with it. And he's looking at it from the mathematical nuts and bolts end of it to try and come up with a reason. And it's not easy. Yes, there was a reason why it happened. If you go back into, as I will shortly, go back into the Philadelphia experiment end of it, which was the beginning of the whole business, one can see from the way that thing was maneuvered that there was a higher hand of some kind involved in setting the whole thing up, because it would never have happened the way it did, unless two obscure dates, 40 years apart, coincided with two experiments.
If I could just add something directly to your question, quickly. Having to do a scene and knowing possibly some other intelligentsia, there's a function of the time tunnel where the a person, or in my experience, per se, it's the only thing I can relate to, when a person moves through a number of procedures, there's a point in maybe 2/3 down the tunnel as perceived where there's a very big thump. The energy leaves the body. There's a tendency to see on a broad scale. I can only answer that question theoretically. Looking back on it, I'm sure there is and there was some intelligence there, certainly higher form than we know. As to the recognition of it, I would have trouble in that sense, but there is what I call a full out, where the energy leaves the body, and there's this tendency to see on a very broad scale. That's partially what they were trying to do with Montauk, is to stabilize and to freeze what I call a full out, the seeing process.
They didn't want you to see it.
No, they were trying to manifest that.
Oh, they were.
For whatever their purpose is.
In your travels, did you ever go back in time and see other of your own lifetime? Did they ever ask you to do that?
No.
It would seem to me that you could do that.
You could, it would be dangerous.
Yeah, but it wouldn't be in your interest.
No, but I just wondered if they ever asked you to.
I have no information directly, but theoretically it's very possible to influence a person's function, however back so far.
What was the role of the aliens at all? I mean, other than the chair, which they had
Okay,
given
that would be the earlier part of this that we haven't got into yet. Let's look at another little sideline here. What was done, one of the cute little trips that they made was they made a trip from 83 back to 63 and installed him in a new body. That's all I knew of it, that they installed him in a new body. I don't know why, but Al could, of course, tell us why. This is my Dodge Caravan before the front got broken. Back to the main door in the back of the big building. This is the main radar building. This really, we should go to this picture later. That's essentially what it is.
All I know is what I got here. I don't know what the deal is.
Alright, let's go to the next picture. It's out of focus. This is leaving the site. Of course, there's my car again. And the red building is one of the old leftover radar buildings that they didn't use. The round things, we don't know what the hell the round things were. And this is the street coming out.
Okay.
That's the back end of the main antenna. This thing is an antenna which is roughly 300 foot by 200 foot. And that tower that goes this way, the game horn is mounted on. That's the omnidirectional antenna. The little thing on top that's shaped like that is the IFF antenna. They didn't use the IFF.
Is this for the project?
Yeah, this is the transmitter. This is the transmitter. You're looking at the transmitter. In fact, anyone that has any sensitivities, this is the full shot of the building. Anybody that has any sensitivity can probably feel the energies coming off this picture.
This is a fallen tower or what?
That's an extra tower.
We have a pointer for him so he doesn't have to point something, a stick or something.
Oh, yes, we have a,
Oh, okay.
Here it is on the pointer comes. This is going to be a ride using a lot of This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 floors in this structure. Each one is about 100 foot square.
The transmitter?
This is the transmitter building. The transmitter was on this floor, and this was the antenna controller. All these ducts here are cooling for the transmitter.
That's just sitting there open?
Yep,
I'm looking for a lawsuit.
yep.
Go ahead.
This is another picture, another site, another picture of the building with the antenna. Again, you can see doors you can look out. This is all open. We know it's open as of September.
you can walk inside the building.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
This is a shot.
Alternate reality.
This is just essentially background. Let's keep going. This is another one of those round structures. What they did with these in the project, if anything, we don't know, and they didn't look maintained. You can see it's all rusted over here, here, but you can see that other building was maintained. This was like about 85, these pictures were taken. Okay. This is a shot from the roof looking up at the antenna. This is a catwalk. People walk here. You get an idea of the massive size of this thing.
The antenna?
This is the antenna. Transmitting antenna. This is shot out over, that's the ocean, from the roof of the building. This is the group. This person should be familiar. That person should be familiar. This is my friend Jeff that comes up from Maryland. That's the guy that plays Rambo running around the woods.
Are those buildings in the back?
That's two of those round buildings. You can see they haven't been maintained. Look at the doors here.
Did you go inside of them?
Yeah,
And you couldn't tell what it was all about?
there isn't anything in them. Nothing in them. Those are cleaned out.
And those buildings you can still walk in now?
If they haven't boarded up, sure. I don't know. This is a picture of what they call omnidirectional antenna. This is what the antenna they use. In fact, if you look, you see all the wires feeding in, all the coax cables feeding in. This they use to send out a signal, but we believe they use this more for picking up signals. This will pick up a return from the person that they were targeting. This has one huge cable that goes up to it and a bunch of little cables for receivers. And they control the different dipoles on this. Okay, let's go. This is a general shot of the antenna. That's the game horn. See, they were first focusing this so the signal would go in, bounce off, come out. But they finally realized that they didn't want the Hertzian component to reflect it, so they positioned it so the gain horn pointed right at the subject. That's the way they eventually developed this thing so it worked right.
Outside.
Outside,
The
yeah.
subject was outside.
The subject was in another building that was downrange.
The focal point was at that building.
Yeah. This is a distance view of the thing. You can get an idea how massive it is.
What are these dimensions approximately?
300 feet by 200, 150 feet. 100 feet this
125
way.
tons for the antenna and 125 tons for the control mechanism on the roof.
That's the pedestal.
125 tons each.
This weighs 125 tons, and this is about 200 tons.
Did you help design this transmission antenna?
No, that was part of the Sage. The white dot shot. But this is interesting. This is essentially the main building. This is the transmitter building. This is the control center where all the computers were, and this was offices.
Where was the subject?
Down the hill that way.
Okay, in another building, yeah.
Now those buildings are still there. Are they
Oh, yes.
open?
This one is open. I'm told this one is open and this one is open, and the powerhouse is open. This is a distance shot. You're 2 miles away here from the building. Montauk Highway. Same thing. You're 2 miles away here. I don't know what that is. Oh yeah, you're further away. This is now this is in the town still. This is like about 5 miles away here. That's the building.
And no telephone.
What about this?
This building here is where they had the subject. This is how many people know what the planetary grid is?
I know.
Yeah.
This is one of the cross points of the grid.
Wow.
You stand here, you'll feel the grid.
And it's still there.
Yep.
That plot of land.
And if we have the right picture, you'll see they arranged the buildings around the cross point like the Indians arrange mounds of rock around the cross points. These buildings tune the cross point. But they focused, if I remember, on that building, where they had the subject. You know, these buildings are Duncan verified it. That's where he was.
Okay.
Duncan has a tendency to flip when he sees stuff like this. Okay, let's go to the next one. That's me. Standing next to the radar site 5 miles away. And you see my welding glasses.
Yes.
Another shot. You can go on. That's extraneous.
Do these power lines go straight to that
Yep.
location?
They go straight to that
And all they
location.
are is to carry
Those high tension,
wow.
Right here, you can see the high tension lines.
are they still active?
Oh yeah. Those are what supply the point. Okay.
I mean, are they active?
Here's a picture of the pedestal. These are motors. 4 of them. The motors are going today.
This is on the roof.
This is on the roof.
Motors are gone?
Yeah, someone took the motors. How? I don't know.
How they got them down, right?
Oh, that's not.
If they pushed them off and let them crash, there'd be big crevices in the ground, but we didn't heard of any crevices. Train freaks may have taken these, but these are the same motors that run the big locomotives. This is a picture of the gain horn. This is the thing This is about the size of my Volkswagen Rabbit at the time. This is what actually sent the signal out. It went out like this. More weight guy went down the catwalk and went into the building.
Look at it sideways.
Yeah. Oh, there's the UFO landing pad.
That was a landing pad, right?
What is that? That's the only one of these round little buildings that's maintained.
Oh, right, where's your big building?
Okay, that's an old radar building that wasn't maintained. This is the main operations center. This is where they had all the computers. And the chair was right below this building, we figured. And then that's the office building there. That's where Jack Pruitt and what's his face?
Which building was the subject in? Can we see it there?
Huh?
Can we see the building the subject was in from here?
No.
Okay.
Another same area, essentially. But you notice these are not maintained. This one's nicely maintained.
Mm-hmm.
Some people believe thoroughly that they landed UFOs here. This is a shot of the lighthouse from the roof.
Well, the lighthouse isn't far away.
No.
Oh, wow.
One of those two little
Buildings? Maintenance buildings of some
These are
sort.
maintenance buildings.
I don't think they've been used
Structure
in
on the
years
right,
and years.
was that?
That's the red radar site. There's a big bubble on top of that at one time, but that's been there for years. Same shot. Just different lens.
This space had been constructed in World War II, something like that.
You know, after the 50s. Looks like we just had that shot.
No, this is the
No,
view.
Yeah.
he took a lot of shots.
Yes, Jan took tons of shots.
What is this?
That is what's left of the old Fort Hero. There was gun emplacements in there. There's a emergency generator in that building now. Well, there was. Close as I could figure from the wiring.
There were the 4 megawatt generators in the
You'll see
center.
it. No, you'll see him. Go on. That's another shot of the red building.
Why a pink building?
Which was the building where there were marks, you say, on the wall?
Well, we saw them. I don't know if we got good enough detail to see them. I don't know why he took a shot at that, but he liked it.
What you got here?
Same thing.
Yeah. I don't know. Gotta go in a distance. Or
That's the Mob Bell Tower. He took a shot of that too.
all right, Felipe.
We took a shot of that one. The Ma Bell building, of course, is at the base of it. Something new and different. I never understood why. Oh yeah, this is a maintenance shed. This is the diesel tank that ran the generators. Okay, there's the building that the subject was in, from the roof. There's the cross point, and there's the tuning buildings around the cross point. The government built this, and the state, this is a state park today, the state's been told they cannot tear these buildings down.
Oh, really?
Yep,
They cannot what?
they cannot tear these buildings down.
Are they being maintained? Can you still get in them? What?
I don't know.
You try to.
Can you go inside those?
I've been in the building, but I don't know if they're open.
When you're in it, psychically?
Oh yeah, even I can pick it up, and I have the sensitivity
You
of a
can
rock.
just drive there and walk into those buildings.
Well, you drive in the parking lot of Montauk Point State Park and then walk back.
Now, is
About
that
2
gate
miles.
there, is that the gate
No,
separating the
no.
state park from the?
This is just pipes going over the
Okay,
over
but
the walkway.
you can't drive there.
No, you can't
There's-
drive up here. They got gates that are closed.
Okay, okay.
But you can walk in and around and you can get there.
I saw cars there when you were there.
Well, we had their permission to be in there to take pictures and stuff like that. This is just another shot of over there. You can see how far away they were focusing, and they were focusing right on this building.
Yeah.
It was right in line of sight.
But you can't drive into the main base.
No, not now.
No, you
No.
just gotta walk
You,
through.
you gotta walk in.
Yeah, especially. Okay. You have permission, when did you go with your car?
This was May
When it was warm.
'86. Yeah.
May of '86.
Yeah.
You have a letter?
Yeah, we had a letter.
That letter no good now?
No, it's not any good now.
What is that tank?
This is the diesel fuel tank that ran the generator station. Oh, I don't know why you took a picture of that. Except you can see again the building where the subject was of the early experiments. Same thing. There's the building again.
Yeah. Pictures here.
Let's keep going. There's the powerhouse. This thing has 4 huge diesel generators, and you can see the cooling towers for each. They used 2. They had one ready to go, and one was being repaired.
How big were those things? Did you say?
Megawatt.
I mean, how physically, how big? How long? High?
Size of a locomotive. They're locomotive engines, essentially.
No.
Yeah.
Now, if the power went out coming in on those trunk lines, so that wouldn't be enough power to power this.
Well, they
vortex, would it?
originally used this to run the station, but what happened, they discovered when they turned on, it created such time disturbances, it gave the generators the heebie-jeebies and they went down. So they put the generators down permanently and ran off a loco.
Right.
But the generators had the heebie-jeebies. This is another shot of the power station.
Oh, you were really in there.
Yep. Another shot over, I think this is the bay between the forks. Same thing.
The antenna.
That's one part of the antenna.
I don't know if this is right. But
That's a shot of that other gantry from the roof. You saw that thing next to my car.
Yeah.
See, that hasn't been maintained either.
do I have it right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you
There's stuff strewn all over this base.
Now, are you saying that this 30-foot creature was doing stuff to things like this or no?
Yeah, we think that was a part of it.
Ripped it off, you mean?
But if I see anything that's obvious, I'll let you know.
I don't know, there's not a whole lot more here. Yeah. There's a lot of duplicates that I didn't use.
No, that's nothing. You've seen that.
Now we go inside.
Yeah, okay. That's a choke. That's a charging reactor. Yeah.
Could you speak a little louder, please?
This is what they call a charging choke. This is a filter choke, I'm sorry. The rectifiers are up in there. They had big multi-disc rectifiers up in there. You know, what I call hockey pucks. Huh?
What type of material are they used to rectify something like?
Silicon.
Yeah, solid state.
Yeah. I call them hockey pucks.
Silicon or selenium?
Silicon. I call them hockey pucks. This is one of the power tubes. This is called an amplitron. That's the tube right there. And those are the magnets for it. And the pulse transformer is in this oil-filled tank. And this crane lifts this thing out.
How
And
big
this
is that
one-
diameter on the anode?
3 foot.
This part of the equipment that was, that had to be destroyed, or is it just?
No, they left this behind. Let's go on. This is a tube fully assembled with all the magnets on it. This thing is about 6 foot tall from here to here.
Preston, that would never be used for radar, is that correct?
They originally used it for radar. This was long distance radar.
Uh-huh.
But then they rebuilt them. Another shot of the amplitron. I never noticed a red floor before. Is Al here?
Yeah, I'm here.
You ever notice a red floor?
No.
Something funny going on.
When we were in there, part of it was red. And I don't recall what parts.
This is a close-up of the amplitron.
When you look at the walls in the back of that, you can see the marks.
It just depends on the very unusual.
This is some of the acetylene torch marks where they cut the waveguides to stop it. This is the power transformer. This thing probably is about 12 tons. This is the type of thing that I tell Duncan move. He grunts, he groans a little, and he moves it.
Mungo-like beams.
Yeah. This is the Thyratron. This is the main pulse modulator. They use 4 of these things. This is about 2.5 foot tall, this tube. And about 6 inches in diameter. Wow. And they have 4 of these in parallel to fire off the pulse forming network.
That wasn't just sitting there, was it?
Yeah.
I hope you got it.
Yes.
Oh, good.
Well, this is one of the ones that's broken.